Hey everybody, I'm sitting because, just for preference, I get super nervous, and so just like one short story, in high school I was on the debate team, I don't know why, and I had to give a response, and I proceeded to like fall on the floor, and then I found my legs, and then I just ran out the door and ran into a closet. And I still, and even though I've done quite a few talks and perform, I do improv sometimes, I still have that nerves, and especially when I do talks. So I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna hedge my bets. But this is my talk. It's always studying mobile accessibility, and we'll see if this clicker works. I'm Crystal Preston-Watson. I'm a quality engineer at a startup just kind of down the road called Spruce Labs. We have a platform for guest experience, especially right now in retail and salons. You may have heard of like Ultra Beauty. We're in some shops with them. It's a really cool place, and just started, and right now we're focused on kind of quality stuff, but starting to work on some accessibility for the platforms and applications. So I just wanted to give an agenda of like where we're going today. So first off, I'm going to give a overview of a web accessibility, just a brief one, just to kind of get everyone on the kind of same like level of what web accessibility is. I didn't want to assume everyone just knew exactly kind of what it entails. And then I'm going to go into WCAG, which are the kind of guidelines to how you make websites and applications accessible. And then I'm going to go into more specifically how those guidelines deal with mobile accessibility. I'll go into, there's kind of new since last year, there's been actual focus on mobile applications. Oh, and and also talk about some Android and iOS features and tools. So here's a web accessibility overview. I just wanted to start off because this is something that people tend to ask, like either online or just me in person, like what the ally means. You'll see that a lot when people talk about accessibility, especially on like Twitter or like on social media. And ally is just a way to shorten accessibility Twitter has like a 240 character limit. And so if you're like hashtag accessibility, you're taking up quite a lot of that. So so ally is just, it's accessibility shortened, and in the 11 in the ally comes from, so A11Y ally has how it's pronounced. It's 11 letters between the A and the Y. And you'll see that, so now you know. And I just want to say, there's some great people online, especially on Twitter, like some really good experts. And so if you follow the A11Y hashtag, you'll get to see some really cool people, interact with them, very friendly, people that I kind of look up to from all around the globe. So just a suggestion. So pretty much what accessibility is when you're talking about websites and applications is just that sites and applications that accommodate all users on all devices, regardless of the situation and circumstances or ability of the user. So really just, plainly, if you have a website, if you have an application, you have built it, you have designed it in a way that everyone who wants to use your application can access it. It's really, it's pretty simple. It's that I think there's, when people are kind of, coming into accessibility, especially from, in the tech space, there's this apprehension that it's something hard to do, or it's hard to make things accessible, and that's just really not the case, especially if you're coming in intentionally with accessibility. I think the kind of, and I spoke with this last year, kind of myths about accessibility. If you're not intentional about accessibility, if you're not coming in, if you're coming in trying to, like you already have an established product, and then you're trying to apply accessibility, yeah, it's going to be hard. But just like anything, if you're going from an Angular app and trying to make it a React app, it's going to be hard because it's like especially if you're a developer who doesn't know Angular and you're now tasked with like making it a React app. And that's the same thing with accessibility. Accessibility, when you come in and you're like, this application is going to be accessible, it's just like building any other app. I mean, your sites should be accessible because you want all users to be able to use it. I mean, that's what we're here for. That's what we want to do. That makes it makes you money. Do you want to leave money on the table? No. Yeah, like that's my grandfather told me that, like when I would throw change, he's like, don't leave money on the table, and you put it in his pocket. So I learned that early. So on the screen are just some numbers of kind of establish like who are the users that we're talking about. So according to the World Health Organization, about 1 billion people around the globe. So about 1 billion of the world's population has some form of disability. And according to the last census that was taken, 56 million live in the United States. And that's a pretty significant number. And on a daily kind of consistent basis, 28 million of those people use the internet on a daily basis. That is a significant portion. I think people tend to forget that. We think about people who use who have disabilities as, well, they don't go online. They don't why would they go online? And it's a very kind of demeaning and insulting attitude. Like my sister has a disability and she goes online all the time, and it's like and she texts me and sometimes and bothers me, which I love, and with questions and stuff like that, and she is way more savvy about stuff like like Twitch, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, and like so I just want to give that kind of context of there are many people in this country that have disabilities. Some of them that you can see, some that you can't see, and they and there's nothing that they're not their disability, and they're not different in their wants and needs and desires. So yeah, continuing on, I just want to give kind of a little bit more further context of the types of disabilities that users might have. So you have visual disabilities, that's someone with low vision, blindness. I know for me personally, I have started to lose my vision. I was born with ocular toxoplasmosis in my right eye, so I actually don't really, I have no peripheral vision. I actually no central vision in my right eye. And then a couple years ago, I was diagnosed with keratoconus, which is the coating of the corneas in both my eyes. So steadily, as I started to notice that a couple years ago, I was like, I was actually playing Skyrim, and I would have to get really close to the screen, and I finally went to the doctor, and they told me about that. So actually, these are not real glasses. I can no longer wear glasses anymore. I actually wear hard contacts. Actually, don't have any. I don't have a contact in my right eye because they were like, "Do you want?" And I was like, "Well, what is it? Is it going to improve like my vision?" And they're like, "No." So I was like, "Okay, let's save some money." So it's I have a hard contact in my right, and it's and that when I take it out, my vision is is very low. I've just started to, outside of I'm testing, started to use screen readers when I don't have, because hard contacts hurt after a while. And so I take my contact out. I have some glasses that they don't really help that much. So I've just started to use screen readers and assistive technology more and more. So I wanted to talk a little bit about legal requirements. I don't know for, like your different companies and where you're coming from, that your companies, your organizations might actually have a legal requirement to be accessible. I know that some of you might have heard of the Domino case that's in the news right now, and Domino's is currently trying to fight to say, well, why should we make our website, our pizza app, accessible? Because it's going to cost us $32,000, and that's a lot of money for a multi-million-dollar, multi-million-dollar corporation. And one of the things that they're arguing is that there's no laws on the books that covers web accessibility, which is not true. So Section 508 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is kind of a precursor to the American Disability Act, that covers that. So it's going to be interesting to follow along and see how they contend with that, especially since that's been something that's been agreed upon by organizations and corporations for quite a while now. But yeah, so if you work at a healthcare company, insurance companies, government agencies, including businesses and companies that take government funding, a significant portion of government funding, banking, financial institutions, you're going to be covered. You are required by Section 508. And for public universities, K through 12, any sort of any universities and colleges and private K to 12 schools are required by Section 504. So definitely know that if you're a company right now and you're kind of wondering, you should definitely check. But don't just do it because it's a legal requirement. Do it because it's the right thing to do. It's just what you should do. But if that's not enough to want to do it, just out of the kind of just being a human being, do it because you'll get fined. So, I wanted to starting to talk a little bit about accessibility, mobile accessibility, and disabled users. This on the screen right now is a screenshot of an article that was in the BBC a couple months ago. And the title of the article says, "People think you can't be blind and use a phone." And this article was about how this particular picture was shared on social media because people are like, well, she has a assistive a walking stick and she's on her phone and she's checking her phone, and people are like, oh, well, she's blind, she can't use her phone, so she is faking her disability. And this is something that really it's kind of surprising that this is still a kind of a pervasive mindset with a lot of people, that people who have disability, they're like, okay, maybe they'll use, again, it's this thing of like, well, people with disabilities don't leave their house. They don't, they don't have jobs. They don't have, friends. They don't have activities or hobbies or anything like that. So, and they don't need to be, to go different places and still be connected. And, this is something that really is just, it's not good. It's just horrible. And when I saw that article, I was just so pissed off. Because it's nothing further the truth. I mean, we all are using mobile devices. Like that's kind of like, especially in certain populations and areas, people might just only have a mobile device. I know in certain like inner city areas, the internet is like, in this country, there's, like in rural areas, the internet is not reliable. Like landlines, and they can't get like was it CenturyLink what was it like gig like speeds. So the most reliable access to the internet is on mobile phones, and so that that is something. So mobile device usage is increasing, and that's the same with disabled populations also. This is a kind of study from WebAM. They every few years they do a study about screen reader usage, and so from their latest study, they asked the respondents, like do you use like how often do you use or do you use a mobile screen reader? And from 2009. Where they only had 12% of their respondents say they use a mobile screen user, to October of 2017, it grew. It's like from 12% to 88%, and that shows that people who need accessibility are using mobile phones, and they need applications to be accessible. So I'm going to go into WCAG, and after this I'm going to go into some of the success criteria WCAG covers specifically with mobile devices. But I know that some of you may not know about WCAG, or if you kind of heard of the acronym of like what it means. So WCAG, it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And those are a series of international recognized guidelines for improving web accessibility created by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. And so organizations and companies and other places who actually have a legal requirement use actually the government recognizes WCAG as the kind of concrete set of guidelines and standards for accessibility. So that is WCAG. It's and there's 4 principles that WCAG kind of runs on. I cannot speak today. is POUR, and that stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable, users must be able to perceive the information being presented. Operable, users must be able to operate the interface. Understandable, users must be able to understand the information as well as the operation of the user interface. And robust, and this is something that really kind of points to mobile accessibility and mobile devices as they kind of, the different kind of devices come about. Robust, users must be able to access the content as technologies advance. So there are 3 levels of conformance with WCAG. There's level A, and these are kind of like the most basic kind of things, features that you can make accessible. These are really good, even if you are, if you're kind of new into like, well, I want to get started, or, what can I do? Level A, trying to kind of solve for level A accessibility issues is a good place to start. If you have a legal requirement, that comes level AA, and that's where you have to be to fulfill legal requirement. You have to, your application, your website has to be level AA, and that's been the way since last year. So like it was either June or January of 2018, and that deals with the biggest and most common barriers for disabled users. So yeah, so if you, I think, and that's a good, it makes sense that, to be an application that is, considered accessible, that you have solved for the most basic issues and some of the most blocking issues. And level AAA are the highest and most complex level of web accessibility. When it comes to, AAA, I don't know if there are actually any AAA websites out there. I'm drawing, but I haven't seen. Mainly because I know that a lot of trying to solve for AAA kind of issues kind of can come in conflict with others. It's definitely, if you can do that, definitely go ahead. But aim for aim for a AA, because that's gonna get you there. But definitely, as much as you can do, if you can do features and make them AAA, definitely go for it. So as I was talking about how last year it changed for what you need to be what level you need to be at to be compliant. That's because last year you had an update in the standards, and that was before that it was WCAG 2.0, and then last year WCAG 2.1 premiered. And so I think there's a lot of confusion with so was there completely a new rewrite of all the standards? And that's actually not it. It's just 2.1 extends 2.0, and all the standard success criteria and standards that are in 2.0 are in 2.1 word for word. 2.1 only added 17 new criteria because W3C felt there needed to be some more explanation for certain standards. So they added 17 new ones. Some of them were rewritten or they added new ones. And ones they added were completely new was 8 new success criteria that deal with mobile accessibility exclusively. And so that is what we're going to go over right now. So just a little stop. I really wanted to play the theme song from It's Always Sunny. And I didn't, because I'm like, this is eventually going to go to YouTube. And I know if I did that, this would have been taken down. I really did. I had the music queued up. I mean, I went and found a generator because I wasn't going to pay $38 for this font. And I'm never, unless I just ended up just kind of making memes for to justify the cost of this font. So sorry for that tangent, I just had to tell people. Okay, so the first, and it's not new, this is more of an update. So one thing you should know about WCAG, it is wordy, it is very robust and technical. So I'm gonna give you kind of what it says word for word, and then just kind of discuss what this, how this translates into more plain language. I suggest to you, definitely go in and read WCAG. I think it's important, but there are a lot of resources out there that kind of take those, the guidelines and put them in more plain wording. Right now I'm studying for a certification for accessibility professionals, and so I've been kind of going through, and I'm just like, oh man, I have to read all of this over and over and over again until I'm like, okay, and translating it for myself to be like, okay, I get it. So first up is orientation. This says content that does not restrict its view, and also in parentheses is the level of conformance that it is. So it says content that does not restrict its view an operation to a single display orientation, such as portrait or landscape, unless a specific display orientation is essential. And that is I think we kind of know what that means pretty much, is that if you have an application or you don't want to force your users to only use it in one, like in landscape or portrait. You should allow the users, unless it's, and it's like, unless it's essential to that app's operation. And what an example I would think of is like a game. Like there's some games out there that you have to play, like, and I'm gonna talk about games a lot. So sorry, a lot of if you have a game and it forces you to use, there's a lot of games out there that force you to use a landscape mode. You can't have it in portrait. So you want to, and I honestly think that a lot of apps force people to use one landscape because they don't want to deal with changing or having to account for the design and code if you have an application that can be used in either orientation. Next up is pointer gestures. So this is saying all functionality that uses multi-point or path-based gestures for operation that can be operated with a single pointer without a path-based gesture, unless a multi-point or path-based gesture is essential. So this on the screen is a picture of a map on the phone, and like we all, if you used any sort of map application, Google Maps on your phone, you know that you can pinch the zoom, or I forget, where you pinch to do something, and you use gestures on the screen to move the map around. And so if you're going to do that, you also need to have a way to for users that may have mobile impairments to interact with the map, because they may not be able to use a multi gestures. So if you notice it with Google Maps, they have buttons where you can zoom in. So you don't have to, you can interact with the map, you can move the map, you can zoom in, zoom out without having to use a gesture. So that's pretty much what that standard is. If you have an application, you're using gestures, you also have an alternative way for users that can't use gestures to interact with the application. Motion actuation. And this one was, I had, when I first was looking, I had a little trouble with this because it's very wordy. So functionality that can be operated by device motion or user motion can also be operated by user interface components, and responding to the motion that can be disabled to prevent accidental actuation, except when supported interface or essential. So an example of this is Active Edge for on Pixel phones. If you don't know what that is, if you squeeze the phone, you can actually bring up the Google Assistant. And so what this is saying is that if you are requiring some kind of motion, or if, like for the users to interact with it, or say if you're requiring the app to shake something. I've seen some apps like that where it's like to say yes or no or something like that, you have to shake it. If you're going to do that, then you also provide another, sorry, and you also provide, another way for users to interact without, that doesn't just rely on that motion. Pointer cancellation. For functionality that can be operated on using a single pointer, at least one of the following is true: no down event, abort or undo, up reversal, or essential. And so this is something where if you have, it's really when you have buttons and someone who is and I think we have all kind of come across this. You have a button and you maybe gesture over it, and it's not what you want to do, but you don't know how to get out of that action. You were like, maybe it's saying delete your account, and you're like, but I've already moved over it. And especially when it comes to like screeners, other assistive devices, whereas someone who's just using their finger, it may just be easy as removing their finger. But when you have assistive devices, that's not necessarily true. So you're allowing people who are using your application to alternate ways of backing out of an action. And so this is what I found. So this is yeah, I credit the internet because I don't know. So on the screen is this guy in a like cool red turtleneck, and so the caption is, "When you accidentally hit the wrong button on Spotify and banish the artist you enjoy to the shadow realm." And the guy's just kind of like shrugging his shoulders, saying, "I guess I'll die." And then it's like, it's only been 5 years. I'm sure they'll fix it soon. This is, this is something that is, and this is not just for people who need, who have motor disabilities. This is true for all of us. We've all kind of like come across like applications and websites where, you want to do one thing and it's not clear and it's very complicated to do the action that you want. And then when you're trying to reverse it, you can't reverse it because it's, again, not clear of how you reverse it and not do the action. And that's something that is really common in issues with accessibility in mobile devices. Next up is concurrent input mechanisms. Web content does not restrict the use of input mobilities available on the platform, except when the restriction is essential, required to ensure the security of the content, or required to respect the user's settings. So this is just saying that you can't just require your users to just use, say, the keyboard that is relying on the device. So if you allow users to use other devices to navigate and use your application. This on the screen is, I believe it's Hobble. I watched the video of this application. I was like, I hope I get this right, and I probably didn't. This is a Braille keyboard for smartphones. Yeah. I think it's only available in iOS, but this is just saying if you have an application, unless it's really, really, it's essential to your application's function, you allow users to use other devices. And that may mean if they're going to, and that's just not like something like a Braille keyboard, but a headset, a pointer, like if with iPads, if a lot of people use they use pointer pencils, and various other devices. Next up is target size. This is the size of the target for pointer inputs, at least 44 by 44 CSS pixels, except when equivalent, inline, user agent control, or essential. So this is pretty self-explanatory. On the screen, there is, I took this directly from Apple. The first on the left side is a hand pushing a button. The buttons are 44 by 44 CSS, and there is a green check mark because that's what you want. To the right is some very small buttons. And the same hand is they're about to push both of the buttons at the same time. This is something, again, especially with older populations. I worked on an app last year where it was geared towards older populations to prevent them from, exercises that you could do, prevent them from falls, because falls are actually probably one of the most fatal things in older populations. So it was an iPad app, and the buttons were huge, and they needed to be huge because a lot of people, like, depending on their motor skills, and I someone saw and they're like, why are they so huge? And it's like, well, we want people to interact with the app. So yeah, they are huge, and who cares? I'm like, I like it because I have like fat baby fingers, so I will totally hit like the wrong button all the time. And I was like, when I was testing that app, I was like, this is so cool. I'm not hitting the wrong button on like as I'm testing. And so that's like, if you have buttons that like, don't do it because it's a cool design or you're trying to do something innovative. Like, it's like, I mean, unless it's essential, and I'm like, I don't think, unless it's something that, where Apple or, Android is forcing you because that's the UI component, make it big enough, make it, like fit your design and your desires and your code around what is going to be best for the user. Label and name. So this is for user interface and components with labels that include text or images of text, and name. The name contains the text that is presented visually. Okay, so this is pretty much, again, this is another internet credit. On the screen is a package of a toy, and the title is Dogs, but they're not dogs, they're ostriches. And pretty much what this guideline is saying, especially when it comes to screen readers, if you're building out like forms and elements, have the name of the elements in your code be the same name visually, so that it's easier for screen readers and accessible devices to figure out what you are, what the user wants to interact with. So if you had something in your form that said dogs, but it really, behind the scene in the code, the name, the label was named ostriches, they're not going to be able to select, what they want, which is dogs or ostriches or whatever. They're gonna get one of the things that they don't want. And ostriches are like, I think they're mean. So I have a thing. Like, I went to a zoo and pecked me in the head. Like my family has a thing with giant birds. So okay, so this is our last guideline, success criteria: status messages, content implemented using markup languages. Status messages can be grammatically determined through role or properties such that they can be presented by the user by assistive technologies without seeming focus. So I don't know if this is going to sound, I'm going to turn it up, but this is pretty much saying if you have elements that when the user interacts with it, that there will be status messages that come up, and that you have that it can still be read by assistive technology, especially screen readers.
Status message example, heading level 1, status message status and heading level 2, product review. We appreciated your product review and value your opinions. However, comments with inappropriate language will be removed. Comments left per 300 characters or less height per code. Edit multi-line enter product comments. MS. Warning. You will be locked out in 5 minutes if there is no further activity. Select tab or time if needed.
I'm sorry, I should have been like that when I did time. So pretty much, with that, it was a user that was using a screen reader. They were interacting with a form. They did, so they typed in some words, but then they paused, and then there was a status message saying, well, in like if you don't continue on in 5 minutes, then this is going to go away, it's going to expire. And so that's pretty much saying that if you have, with labels, with forms and other kind of interactive, if a user does an action and it causes a status message to pop up, that it can still inform the user what is going on. You'll see this a lot of time with error validation. That's something, a big issue. A lot of places do not have, they'll have, everything else is accessible by screen reader, accessible technology, but except for the error validation. So if a user does something, it causes error, they don't know because they can't actually access that error. So is it 5 minutes now?
It's almost 5 minutes.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, I just wanted, because I'm like, I don't want to. So I'm going to go really quickly through some accessibility features and tools on mobile. I'm mostly focusing on, I know there are other kind of, makers of mobile accessibility, mobile devices, but I'm focusing on iOS and Android for today's presentation, mainly because, as you'll see in this next slide, again, going back to the AIM poll that they had, that when it comes to platform uses, iOS is far, in a way, the most used mobile platform from users with disabilities. As you can see, as of the latest poll, it was 76% of respondents said that they use iOS. Now Android is down to 22%, and then for others it's 2%. And I want to preface something, even though you see and it's like, oh, obviously I should just focus on we should just focus on iOS. Don't do that. I think I see this because I think there's a thing where people who have disabilities prefer iOS, and they prefer iOS because right now Apple is really at the forefront of accessibility technology, and that's true on mobile devices, and that's true on desktop. But right now, Android and Google is really, they're kind of improving their kind of accessibility features on their devices, and that's going to grow. And also, people are going to especially once they know that they can use other devices, will navigate. Just like I think just in general, I use an Android, and that's just because it was cheaper for me than buying an iPhone X because it's I wanted to enjoy other things. So right now, I'm gonna hopefully these slides will be available later on. I just have to add some alt text for the images for screen readers, but they'll be up by anyway tomorrow. But so for iOS, you have features like VoiceOver, and VoiceOver is found between their mobile devices and also on desktop. Zoom and their magnifier to magnify on particular elements. Invert colors for people for low vision and for people who have color blindness. Larger text, and switch control, which just allows users to use a assistive switch device. Android features, TalkBack, which is their TalkBack is the Android screen reader. Magnifier, switch control, high contrast text. A lot of the stuff is the same between the two. They don't act the same. So you can't just be like, okay, I built, my application is accessible for iOS, just do the same things, because one is like Swift, the other is like Java, yeah, so there's a lot of differences, so you can't just be like, I'm just gonna import that. Now, if it comes to I'm not gonna, React Native and stuff I'm not gonna bring that up, but there's some other things that you have to do with that. I'm just focusing on iOS and Android. Even though you can port, okay, sorry. So I'm getting lost in my own thoughts. I'm gonna say, before we go into tools, TalkBack and VoiceOver are gonna be the most important tools that you do. To find a lot of issues, really just running your application and using a TalkBack and VoiceOver on your application will help you a lot to identify issues that you have that you need to improve. There are other things out there, and I'll talk about for iOS. There's Axe, which is kind of a automation automated tool. It's pending right now, so it's going to come in the next few weeks or months. And then there's the accessibility inspector for Xcode that'll allow you to go through. There's some automation components to that, but you can use it. I've definitely. I'm not going to say I've used it a lot. When I test, I'm pretty much manual, and I use screen readers, and also when you're on desktop, keyboard is probably also, along with screen readers, just going through your applications just with the keyboard is a huge thing. Android, a little bit more, and these are not exclusive. These are not the only things. There's tons of stuff out there, and if I could have just done a talk on all the different feature tools out there to help you. It's more of this is a good way to start. On this slide, there's Axe for Android, accessibility scanner, which is great because it's just for Android. It's an application. It'll scan your apps. I use it quite a lot. Just not on anything I'm developing. I'm just using it on applications that I'm just running for myself to kind of see what is up, and usually then I get mad. And then Android accessibility test kit, and that's just a bunch. It goes to a site on in the Android docs of things of all the resources. When you're doing stuff, going to the platform's kind of official documentation is probably the biggest thing you can do. Start there, branch out, and then and kind of do what you need. Takeaways. You're gonna see, so we're at the end. You're gonna see on this next slide, I don't have anything because I forgot. But takeaways is that pretty much I want you to just know that, this is not really, it's not hard if you really are intentional about it. Go out there, do it because it's the right thing to do. You're making people's lives easier, you're making your own lives easier, because this is not just, this helps everyone. Accessible applications help everyone, and that's people with disabilities. That's for disabilities that are permanent, situational, temporary, and people, just everyone. So I will have this up later on, and I'll probably actually add some resources that you can go to and look at. Also, I'll fill this up with something nice. That's it.